Hey everyone, I wanted to show you this really cool example of a Treemap chart. This is really informative. It comes from Information is Beautiful. I'm going to drop the link to this visual and the data that they used in the description below and in the comments. So check that out. It's really neat to explore, and I think what this does is it talks about trillions of dollars across the globe and different things that amounts ranging in the trillions are being used on. So it's a really neat thing to explore, and I kind of want to show you not just the visual as an example and kind of talk about that, but I also wanted to dive into kind of the contents within. So like we'll start with like the smallest unit here. So if you go, this is 1.9 trillion. That's the amount that Amazon's worth in market value. And then you see Google, and then surprisingly right below it, global military spending. So the total amount that all militaries in the world spend is apparently 2.4 trillion. They have all their sources again in this sheet if you have any questions on that. I know I do, so I'm kind of taking this at face value. So if you go through here and you kind of look at, you know, some of these other things, you have some companies like Nvidia and Apple. You have global crime. That's really interesting. You have crypto, the value of crypto total, which is bigger than all those things I just mentioned. You got the GDP of France, that's over here as well. The top 20 internet companies combined, right? So that includes all the companies that we just talked about, I think, except for maybe Nvidia is probably not considered an internet company, but like Facebook, companies like that. Now, if you slide on down here, you'll see the GDP of the US, 26.2 trillion, right? One interesting thing here, the cost of the 2007-8 financial crisis in the US, famous event, that cost of that, if you look how big that is multiple times the cost of the entire global military spending budget, which I just think it's an interesting comparison. You can see how big this block is over here compared to these other ones. And so I think money is a fantastic use case for a Treemap, and this just kind of proves it, right? You slide down over here, this is interesting. So you'll hear politicians talk about Medicare for all. So universal health care for everyone in the US over 10 years, that would be this block. So apparently 30 trillion or 3 per year. If you kind of go over here and you look at this, you'll see that that would be a little bit more than all militaries in the world spend on their budget, right? And on a related note, you'll see US healthcare spending is over here at 4.5 trillion. I think that's an annual figure. So the US government budget, 6.1 trillion. The global cost of cybercrime, right? So I find this interesting when you look at this block over here. It says global crime revenue. I think they split cybercrime out separately, or these numbers conflict, right? So that would be interesting to see. The US government debt, 34 trillion. According to this figure, it goes up all the time, but that's a huge block. There's a couple different blocks over here. China's GDP, US household debt. So this is just debt held by members, non-government entities, private citizens in the US. That's an interesting amount. It's a pretty big block. You have China suspected debt. I find that to be a really interesting topic to break into. And then you have China's GDP. I guess you don't really know China's debt. I think that's kind of what's implied here. You have the estimated amount of wealth hidden offshore by, quote, the rich, which is 42 trillion. That's kind of that's a really big figure right here. So that's just offshore. I think this is in terms of the United States. And then over here, costs of global Green Deal to eliminate carbon emissions by 2050. So this is a giant block. So this would be 73 trillion. And if you look at the amount here versus everything else, you'll just see that as a giant spend. But obviously, if you're looking at now, it's 2024 when I'm making this. If you look at 2050, that's a long way off. So this would be the total amount that you'd spend between here and now. So every year. That's, quick math, a couple trillion, right? But that's really fascinating there. And then this is an estimated savings figure based off of the analysis behind that. The world GDP, 96.5 trillion, which I find to be interesting. And then the total wealth of the, quote, 1%, I find this to be interesting because I wonder what it encompasses. There's certain nation states that have individuals that would be in the 1% globally, like the Saudi royal family, and no one really knows how much money they have. And I think that, from what I know, right? And so that's interesting there. Also, there's some private entities. I do wonder if they are included in this. I guess the source, right, is highlighted here. And what's kind of cool, you'll see, going back to kind of talking more about the data visual, you'll see that the source is shown in pop-up here. So this little white box here, this is highlighting, hey, total wealth of the 1%, describing what this number means, and then the source of it, and then the date. So that was the date as of 2023. If you go all the way down here, you'll see there's some interesting data down here that you can get, different sources, different things talking about this on. Information is beautiful, and so definitely go check that out, and the table here, because I think this is a valuable illustration of the actual data structure that could be fed to a chart like this. And I think it's valuable to note because you can't just feed any structure of data into a chart and get this effect. So I think it's valuable to study things like, there's a column for trillions, and that's, a decimal number. It's showing, number, point number. You have the what, you have what this is, right? So that would be, if you go back to it, so like global crime revenue. So this column right here, that would show something like this header right here, like wealth hidden offshore by the rich. And then you have these other values of like what qualifies it. So this is like specifically Apple what, right? So it could be Apple spending, Apple advertising, Apple market value, right? So that's what that's specifically for. Right, then you have this other column for notes / story / interesting fact. So that's a column just for filling that in. And they have a whole category column. And they even have, I think it's funny, a category for hoarding. Then they have the year, the source, and the source URL. So that way you can go and you can look at that information. I think that in itself is... this is just really great to soak in and understand, because this is how you would structure data and feed it to, in this case, a chart like this, and get this sort of result. So anyhow, I'll leave the links to this below. I hope that this was a good illustration and interesting to you. I think this is really cool to compare, blocks in terms of just piles of money. You look at just, what is the value of all crypto versus what is the value of, the entirety of China's GDP. I just think that that's an interesting kind of thing to see in these sort of volume-driven blocks. And I think it's important to note as well that the size of those blocks is going to be driven by this number here, this column A, it's trillions. So the number is bigger, then the block is bigger, and also the color changes in sort of this heat map driven way, where the highest number is red, that's the hottest, and then down here we have this sort of yellow green value, and that would be the least trillions. So overall, I hope that this was informative, cool. Definitely check out the site, and thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.